We have a solution that has the ability to ultimately bring, how can I say, brands, their products, what we can think of, into the imagery of television or video platforms, right? And that is the way we can do this is basically post the production, which is a huge advantage when you compare it to the notion of product placement, where you have to ultimately get along or work around the issue of having to be scripted into the show and then ultimately being on the set and trying to figure out how to place yourself. And in our case, it's much easier because the technology is able to ingest any kind of content after the production, after editing. We will analyze that content and identify places, spaces where we can actually place brands, right? And that is what I tend to call the fracking of content for the sake of identifying inventory, which then the platform partners or the content partners sell to advertisers, right? And that is a completely new approach because it allows for scale, because we can ingest tons of and hours of video content to identify hundreds of seconds and minutes of placement opportunities. And the second piece is that there's a perspective of, in terms of the flexibility of doing this, that you're not stuck with one product. If you just think about, having product placement, you put a product or something into the scenery, that's it. That's the version, right? In our case, it's not the version because the master remains the master and it is clean. So the opportunity to ultimately place objects and branding into scenes and with variations depending on the audience who's watching it or depending on the markets where you will be licensing your content is a totally new opportunity. On top of that, we have a huge advantage because these placements, we can do these placements a couple of hours before airing. In other words, you have an agility and a flexibility at your hand, which is like totally unprecedented.
You have a bit of a background as a buyer yourself in the agency world. What's the value proposition for the buyers?
So the value proposition is actually very simple. It is in a world where I dare to say people have been educated to look away from advertising, and we all know this is not entirely true, but I tend to say that one of the most used buttons on the internet is probably the skip ad button. No offense. But ultimately, this is our proposition, that we have something that as it integrates into the context, in a way that is contextually and emotionally very, very relevant, and it is happening in the content, and the content is certainly not what people are skipping. They're watching the content because they decided to watch it. And the way we introduce ultimately the presence of a brand is so realistic and so strong that ultimately what it delivers is much greater impact in terms of the advertising awareness and in terms of all brand KPIs you can think of, like consideration, preference, and what have you not. And we have a growing amount of research that actually proves that exactly that is happening, especially when you compare it with audiences that have not been exposed to this kind of new form of advertising, if you will. What we're also seeing is that in combination with traditional, I'm saying pre-rolls, mid-rolls, or advertising breaks, actually it literally works like a turbocharger. You can skyrocket the performance of your campaign in a very, very strong way.
What about the notion of creative optimization or creative versioning? Where might that stand with your publishing partners? Do they have the technology to drive that? Could that be an opportunity?
Yes, absolutely. So what we're seeing is that all the platforms are literally, as we speak, getting ready for that. If they're not ready already, it's just a matter of a couple of months from now. But basically that is part of the entire sort of paradigm change that both the ads, but especially also what we can expose in the content will now be made available in an addressable manner, right? In other words, you will have data triggers and business rules that determine what is being played out, right? To which audience or whatever you decide to do. It could be a daytime play or whatever, geo. And so So we are definitely ready. We're starting to do that. I cannot talk too much about with whom, but basically our technology allows for the rendering of different versions. Again, you could be seeing the same movie that I'm watching on a platform, but you might be seeing a different version, slightly different, because the same product comes in a variation for you and a different one for me. Okay. At the same time, we could actually look for other opportunities like regional or local advertising. So you might be living in one city and I'm in the different one, and we might be exposed to completely different brands and insertions all the way, right? So that is definitely not only on the radar, but it's actually in the making. If I consider that, then ultimately, coming back to what I said earlier in terms of the relevance and the contextual importance that we are able to create by embedding brands into the content will, receive another push, I guess.
Great, and tell us about Tencent, what you guys are doing with them.
So with Tencent, it's a very, very, how can I say, in scope, it's a very broad and very deep relationship and integration that we have, as such as Tencent have their platform and their cloud, and ultimately we're ingesting automatically the content that they have in their library. We analyze it for placement opportunities, push it back. So now it's the inventory platform. They, Tencent, ultimately have the relationships with the agencies and the big advertisers. They make the buy, we do the insertion, and then we play it back into their systems, right? And this is a segmented way we push it back. What I mean with segmented is that it's not just one string of video content that we push, but it's literally just the replacing of certain segments of an entire piece of video, which makes the whole process much, much easier and is also the prerequisite to addressable solutions. So this is a very how can I say, it's a very profound relationship with a partner who's very, very advanced technologically, but also, of course, in terms of the market penetration. So we feel very privileged to be working.
And Stephan, finally, could you just explain the business model in terms of, I understand it's the media is sold by the publishers.
Yes.
Do you get a percentage of the of the purchase, or is a software service fee, or how does that work?
We are definitely a company that is working on the, let me just call it, on the supply side. So this is our territory, and we're not on the buy side. Okay, so we work on the supply side. We partner with companies like Tencent, who generate revenue vis-a-vis or with their brand advertisers and their agencies, and ultimately it is a revenue share model that we have agreed with these partners.